Hi, my name's Dave. I am going to talk you through some of the very fundamentals, and I'm talking about very basic building blocks of music production. So, you're interested in making music at home on your computer. It's fantastic. You've come at exactly the right time. You can spend hours upon hours honing your art to then be superseded by a video of a dog with a hat on. Or alternatively, you can wait a year or so and be utterly usurped completely by AI. It's a bit of a precarious moment in making music. If you're in this to make money, my advice probably would be maybe have a backup plan on that regard. If it is purely for passion, enjoyment, and because you love music, there is literally no better hobby in the world. I adore it. It is a bottomless pit of knowledge and things you can experiment with and enjoy and create, and it can consume everything. I can spend hours upon hours upon hours creating music. And one of the things that really was a big obstacle to me to begin with was the quite obtuse language used by music production. I think just because it's a combination of both audio engineering and as well as that artists. So you'll get kind of arty terms like warm, and then you'll have something else like EQ. And, you know, it'll be like low end, and then it'll be below 200 hertz. And it's just like, what does any of this actually mean? And it took me a long time and a lot of getting, frankly, pilloried and laughed at in certain groups to gather this knowledge together. So to begin with, just to get you off on a reasonable start, I'm going to go through some of the very, very basic things that are worth knowing before you set out and for you to understand. Okay, so I'm going to jump right in. This is not going to be something that is very well edited or is going to be slick, because I'm neither of those things. Well, I mean, I'm not edited. I'm a human being, but you get what I mean. There might be a couple of allusions towards being professional, like the name of the thing that I'm talking about might come up. Otherwise, I'm just going to talk because there's plenty of that kind of flash bollocks elsewhere if you want it. So the very first thing that I think is worth knowing is DAW, or DAW. Now, this out the gate sounds like a weird thing. It basically just means the software that you're using to create music. So it stands for Digital Audio Workstation, and that's stuff like Ableton, Fruity Loops, Logic, all of these different kinds of things. As to which you use, I would personally say it's a very personal choice. I use Ableton because I think it's a very, very good all-rounder. I do everything from rock music to orchestral music, so it covers every single base. But as far as what you want to do a bit of research online, see which kind of fits the mold of the kind of thing you want to make, and go with that. It's basically, as I say, the thing that you use to create on. It's a bit like Word is what you would use, or Open Office, to write a story. There are other elements that you'll include in that, but that's your kind of bare bones. The next thing that you'll hear a lot about is VSTs, or plugins. Now, these are basically little programs or little pieces of software that run within your DAW, which allow you to do other things. For example, when you are using your keyboard to make a synth noise or something like that, that will be a VST or a plugin that is doing that. As well as that, what it can also do is mimic things like reverb and delay. Now, these are obviously all terms that can be very obvious to some if they've played in bands and things like that, and a bit confusing to others. But the easiest way to kind of think about it is it adds effects, or it adds more things to your DAW that allow you to make more interesting noises, I suppose. The next thing is MIDI, another thing that you would have heard bounced around a lot. MIDI used to be, when I was younger, quite shitty sounding Bon Tempi organish music. I'll put a clip of some of it here now just to demonstrate. And although the basic technology hasn't necessarily changed that much, the way that it is used is different. MIDI is basically a signal that you send to your computer, or notes in different ways that you'll put into your computer, and then it triggers a sound. Now, back in the old days of particular synthesizers, it would take a synthesized sound, which is, it would use different waveforms, which are different noises, to make something that sounded like a trumpet. These days, because we have much more powerful computers, you can actually have a very high quality recording of a trumpet in every single note. So that's what programs which are like VSTs, again, we mentioned them before, like Contact, what that does is somebody will go into somewhere like Abbey Road and they will record an orchestra playing every note on your keyboard, or every note that orchestra can play. And then what you can do is input that via MIDI. So you'll say, I want these notes in this order at this speed. You can press play and it will be there. The great thing about MIDI is it's very easy to edit. If you are playing the guitar and you're, 3/4 of the way through a particular complicated part and you bugger it up, you're going to have to do it again. If you're a MIDI, you can just slide those notes and you can amend it, and it is an absolutely fantastic way to make everything from EDM all the way to scored music for film and television. I use MIDI in everything. The drums these days, for example, are astounding because they just sound like drums. As long as you know how to treat them like a real drum kit in your DAW, it can sound exactly like you've got a drummer there. And the next thing is a controller, or a MIDI controller. And the easiest way to demonstrate this is if I just demonstrate how how slick this is. This is a controller here, right here. You might think it looks like a keyboard. The difference is this will not make any noises if I plug it into an output. There are no pre-programmed sounds on it at all. It is literally there to control the MIDI in my machine. So any notes that I would hit on this, or any of the faders here, which would control things like volume, they will just control what's going on the computer. Now, because it's shaped like a keyboard, you can play it exactly like you would an old synthesizer back in the day, but you will need a machine to plug it into. So don't expect, if you buy one of these, that you'll be able to sit there and jam ideas out. Unless you plug it into something, it's not going to do anything. All right. The next thing with that, and this is always usually, I would say, the first thing that people will buy, is an audio interface. I'll put an image up now of an audio interface, and it does what it says on the tin, really. It's a way for you to interface with your computer with things like guitars, microphones, fundamentally anything that you can plug into a jack that you would have on an amp or anything like that. You can plug into that. You can change the gain or various things. We'll get to gain in a bit. In order to have that recorded in your DAW. So lots of common brands for these. Most common, I would say, is probably Focusrite. I've got a Focusrite Claret. They make very affordable interfaces that are very good. And also, one of the brilliant things about Focusrite as well is they tend to keep their values. You can kind of upgrade and improve as you get better. They usually will come, if it's a smaller studio like this one, with 2 inputs. So you'll be able to plug in 2 separate things at once. If you're a one-man band like myself, it's very, very rare that I actually use 2. I use probably 1 continually, I think. But irrespective, it's one of those great examples of something that was utterly unobtainable a few years ago and is now very affordable. And I would definitely recommend that you use it. Not only does it supply your machine with information from the instruments you're playing or what you're singing, it will also allow you to plug into speakers or monitors, which are basically posher versions of the speakers that you'll get with your computer or your stereo. We will also get to those later, but it's kind of like a hub in a way, I suppose, is the best word for it. Everything goes in and everything comes out, and that's what helps you create music that I would say is more human. It's not synthesized because it comes from a person. And also you'll see people who do podcasts, etc. They'll also use one. Because another thing that they do is give phantom power. Now, phantom power ties into, everybody knows what microphones are. I'm not going to bore you with it, but there are going to be two that you're going to hear the most about: dynamic and condenser. Now, within those two brackets, there are different kinds of dynamic and condenser microphones, but I'm not going to go into that right now. This is an example of a condenser mic. I'm not pleasuring someone off screen. I am just trying to unscrew this. Bear with me. Once again, well, that's not very good, is it? I'll have to test that afterwards. So this is a condenser mic. It's an Aston Origin. It's a lovely mic. Very small, actually, for a condenser microphone. They're usually much bigger. Now, these are incredibly sensitive, he says after dropping it on the floor. And I mean that, although they're physically sensitive, unfortunately, they're also very sensitive to sound. So these are the kind of mics that you'll often associate with people recording vocals, acoustic guitars. You wouldn't use these kind of mics for things like drums, for example, because they would be too loud. They pick up so much. The first time I heard something through a condenser microphone, I was amazed I could hear things the other side of my house that were going on. They're very, very sensitive. Now, these kind of microphones, you might plug it into, say, your amp at home or a PA system, and nothing will come out of it. And you'll think, well, is it broken? What's wrong with it? The reason that you won't hear anything is because it requires phantom power. Now, on your audio interface, there will be a little button somewhere, and it usually has, I think it's 48 volts or something along those lines. You'll press that, a red light will come on, and that will send power to this microphone, allowing you to record with it. Other microphones, and I'll talk about this one here, which is a dynamic microphone. Oh, whoops, excuse me. You can see that one there, look. Now, this is a Shure mic. You've probably seen quite a few of these online. They're very common with podcasters, etc. Now, usually a dynamic microphone would look like the ones that you traditionally see people on stage singing into, you know, the stem with the bulb with the mesh on it. You would traditionally just plug those in. You might need something to kind of lift the sound up quite a bit, or get into that at another point, but they won't require additional power. This one does, confusingly, but that's because that's just what it comes as a package. Rule of thumb is it's not going to require, particularly if you're recording it into your computer, any additional power to go into it. You might need to turn the volume or the gain up considerably because they're not as sensitive as a condenser microphone. Hello, not quite sure what happened there. Basically, I think the VPN switched back on and then booted me off Droid OBS, which is the thing that I'm using to stream. But anyway, as I was saying, rule of thumb, dynamic microphones, you might need to turn the gain volume up quite considerably in order to hear what you're recording, but you're not going to need that phantom power. Phantom power sounds all mysterious and shit. It really isn't. It's basically just a current going to particular microphones so that they have the power that they need to run, and they are almost always condenser mics, the more sensitive ones like this. They also do, I think Rode is quite a common one. I've used a Rode NT one a few times. They're really great microphones. Have a look online, have an experiment. Again, the good thing about these kinds of things, it's not a hobby that you necessarily, although it's expensive to begin with, you can sell these things and they do retain a fair amount of value. So if you find yourself not getting on with a particular mic that I have in myself in the past, you can just sell it for almost the same amount as you bought it for, which is always great. So the last thing for today, because frankly I've waffled on far too much and you're probably bored of sin at this point, is audio treatment. Now, this is something that you'll hear a lot about. People will waffle on about it constantly. It's a big obsession, and for good reason, but I think it's one that is, I certainly misunderstood myself quite considerably. Initially, I was obsessed with trying to remove any sound in the background of any recordings that I did. That wasn't practical because I do my recordings in an old dining room. So my PC is here. Digital audio workstations are quite processor intensive, so my fan is going like a good, and there's not much you can do about that. Really, it is what it is. Audio treatment, more specifically, is to try and treat the sound, particularly when you go into, and we will touch on this in the next video, mixing and mastering or listening to your music. It's to stop refractions or echoes around the room. Now, if I click my fingers, and hopefully this is the case, that should be dead. Now, that's because this room is treated. You can probably see, well, you see where the Republic of Ireland flag is there, and you can probably see a little bit of maroon there, right there. Those are boards that I got from Studio Spares, and when I put them up, the difference was astounding. The room sounded dead, but in the best possible way. I'm actually autistic, and I have big issues with noise. This room is very comforting to me because there is no echo and no reflection of sound. The curtains behind me here by the door, I can never do that right, the thing with a finger going in the opposite direction, is not because I record in a brothel, but because it's an old dining room and those doors are glass. And over there is a whole line of glass again, as well as my window here, but that goes to the kitchen, which is great for tea, but not ideal when it comes to not having shit echoing back and forth. So I put those curtains up in order to treat the room. So audio treatment is basically just that. It is to try and make the room sound as dead as possible. You might go down the route, some people do, of audio proofing or soundproofing to try and, if they're avoiding making noise with neighbours and that kind of stuff. But often if you're mixing in just headphones anyway, it's not going to be that big of a deal unless you're kind of, as my partner calls it, yawping down the microphone, singing very loudly. I am actually going to touch on mixing and mastering because I think it's a handy thing just in general to know music. So you often hear the two mixed together and confused. You will often get an album and it will say remaster or it will say remixed. The very straightforward way of thinking of it is, if you are mixing something, you have all of the individual tracks of the piece of music that you're making, and you are controlling them individually, one at a time or all at once if you've got a big, console or something, to treat those pieces or those little bits of music differently to create a piece of music or a structure of music or a sound. So say, for example, people like Rick Rubin or Flood or people like that are quite well known, and they're well known because they're able to create certain sounds or certain treatments of recordings that are to a certain standard and have a certain feel about them. That's often the kind of what people would call a producer. It's the person that will sit and they will decide where things should sit in a mix, how it should sound, what effects should be added to it. That's mixing. You're kind of putting all the bits together and then you are, baking the cake, so to speak. The next step in the chain is mastering. Now, I will show you this later in a DAW, my DAW that I use, Ableton. You leave a little bit of a gap, volume-wise, for the mastering process. And the mastering process is basically that final bit of spit and polish on a song. So they will make sure all the levels are right, that it doesn't go over a certain amount, that all the kind of bass levels and all the kind of different sounds in it sound exactly as they should do for a mix for radio, or more commonly these days for things like Spotify, Tidal, all those kinds of things. They will give it that final pass and that final kind of stamp of approval and finish it, as it were. You'll give them the song and they'll go, right, I'm going to kind of finish the overall edit as a whole thing. It's a art form I haven't personally mastered, which is ironic. It's a very, very specific skill. It's just not something that I've had time to do, to be honest. And I would rather trust a mastering engineer to do it. You can get quite good AI mastering tools these days, or just good mastering tools in general. Ozone, for example, they do a really good mastering suite that will help you get those levels right. And I would probably recommend initially when you're creating music to use something like Ozone or eMastered or Lambda or someone like that, just to master those tracks for you, because you're going to need a little bit of help to start with. I still haven't hit that point with mastering that I'm good at it. So I'll often, if it's an important piece of music, give it to somebody else to master, because I don't have that skill set. Need to learn it though. So that's today's, and that's probably a very long video actually, but then, you know, I'll try and have at least an allusion toward being more succinct, to the point, and pithy next time. There's probably nary a bugger's going to watch this anyway, so it don't really matter. What I will come to next will be some other terms that are more kind of specific within the DAW itself, because that's where you're going to spend most of your time. It's going to be in the software working on it. One other thing I wanted to say before I end the video is another YouTuber that I highly recommend you looking at, because they're not a YouTuber, they're a producer. I don't have his book to hand because it's literally, I tidied it away earlier when I referenced it. It's a really good book, and you can Google the chap. He's called Warren Hewitt. He's an absolutely astounding producer, really nice guy, lovely bloke, and he does like the Produce Like a Pro YouTube videos. He goes into much greater depth than I would, and he has vastly more experience than probably most people, and he's also a very enjoyable person to watch. You know, there's no kind of arrogance or kind of nonsense with him. He's just a nice guy who wants to impart knowledge. So if you are gunning for more info, I would say go down that route. Otherwise, I shall see you next time, whenever that may be, and we shall bridge some other concepts in music production that are mostly within your DAW, which you, I'm assuming, would have chosen by then. We'll have a look at the terms and things that you're going to come across most commonly with them. In the meantime, take very good care of yourself. Have a lovely evening. And yeah, take care. Bye-bye.